Hello, this is Brian Carroll, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's B2B Lead Podcast. I'm really excited to have Michael Brenner with us today. Michael is someone that I've followed for a long while. In fact, as we were just talking before this interview, we've both been mutual fans of one another. Michael's received recognition across the internet for his knowledge in shaping content marketing, and he's a keynote speaker, an author. He's also CEO of Marketing Insider Group, and so I'm really excited to bring his thoughts on empathy. Michael, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, and looking forward to talking about empathy, which I think is so important in today's landscape. So yeah, make a long story short, as we get older, I find that I need to summarize my career much more quickly than I used to have to. But 20 plus year career in sales and marketing and leadership roles in various kinds of companies, large and small. And most recently, about 10 years ago, was hired by SAP as the first head of digital marketing, became their first VP of global content marketing, and essentially helped them kind of, I think, modernize the digital marketing approaches that they were taking, very much taking an empathetic approach like we're going to talk about. And what I found was that there was just such a need as I got out in the marketplace and started speaking and writing. There's such a need, I think, for brands to understand, they want to do it, I think, but really struggling with how to get it done and how to change the culture inside their organizations. And so that's what I've been focused on. I built Marketing Insider Group, essentially as a kind of a one-man agency for now, but with the point that, I've been there, I've done that, I've been inside corporate marketing departments, I understand the politics and the culture challenges that marketers face today, and really dedicating my life to trying to help as many companies, as many brands, as many marketers as I can to understand how to really put themselves in a leadership position by helping their customers.
Well, that's fantastic. And I just wanted to ask you, so I came across your article from LinkedIn, and actually several people forwarded it to me and said, Brian, you should check this out. And I wanted to ask, what inspired you to start writing and talking about empathy recently? Yeah, well, as you know, it's not something I've been doing for a long time, and I've been kind of talking around it. And what I found is, as I talk to senior executives, and maybe we'll get to I have a really good story. I think we can maybe get to a little bit later on. But a typical conversation for me might involve, this digital world and content marketing and creating content for customers. We think we get it, but now we need to figure out how to do it. And in the course of the conversation, what I end up finding is that there's an executive usually, or someone in a position of power, who's kind of got their arms folded, asking the challenging question, how's this going to help us sell more stuff? And so, I wrote a book, I co-authored a book called The Content Formula to specifically address this sort of, results-based question, which was how do you show ROI from this approach? And in the book, I talk about how you can actually show a better return on investment with marketing that focuses on, delivering content people actually want. But even after all of those, sort of financial objections were removed, I still found that there was resistance inside a lot of companies. And so what I realized was that there's this cultural underpinning, and it's really a natural instinct. I think we can talk about in a little bit more depth as well, but there's a natural instinct inside a business to want to promote itself. And yet that's counterintuitive. And that's why I came to this kind of realization that the missing element, and you've been talking about it for a long time, and really look to you for the leadership on this topic, but it's empathy. It's empathy that's missing, and a value on empathy inside corporate, cultures and structures. And so it was kind of a rant in a way, but that's why I, kind of put that out there. Well, and you described it really as this counterintuitive secret to success. And why is that?
Yeah, so like I said, the natural instinct, and this is true for all of us, it's human nature. And the example I love to give is,
I don't, the posts that I put out on Facebook, the updates, for me, I don't do a lot of business content on Facebook. It's mostly pictures of my kids and the trips we take. And it's essentially me putting my best face forward to the world. And that's what I think we all generally tend to do in the social world that we live in, to the connections that we have. So it's our natural instinct, and there's nothing wrong. I think there's really nothing wrong with wanting people to see that, you're happy and you're healthy and you're doing fun things. And so that's the natural instinct we carry with us when we walk inside the company, the companies that we work for. And so the natural instinct of the business person is to want to promote itself and put its best face forward. And so that's why I think it's counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to think that you can sell more stuff by not talking about the stuff you sell. And that's why I think empathy is so counterintuitive.
Well, I know it's something that I struggle with, and I think everyone does when we're focusing on getting our needs met, whether that's hitting a number, as you talked about, achieving ROI, and it's a challenge. And I think you talked about this collective amnesia we have. So why is it, we change as we walk into the building, that we start thinking differently when we put on our marketing and sales hats? So how can we overcome this amnesia to better relate to our customers?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I love the term, and it was actually coined by Noah Fenn, who's the head of video sales and strategy at AOL. But he talked about how this natural instinct to self-promote is collective amnesia, and what he means by that is that, kind of like I said, that although we're real people, when we walk inside the buildings that we work in, we kind of forget, that we are real people. We forget how to market to people just like us. And that's essentially the collective amnesia. So we walk in, we want to present and promote the companies and the products that we sell. And yet that's exactly the kind of thing that we as consumers don't want, right? So a head of marketing who makes an ad buy is doing that with the knowledge that he might or she might hate ads. That's the collective amnesia, right? So when you're watching a TV show, you don't need to see an ad for Chevy 15 times over the course of the 45-minute show, right? But the ad buyer for Chevy, is making that decision. There's a person, there's a group of people generally behind those kinds of decisions, and that's the collective amnesia that we talk about in the article. It's just we make decisions in the business that as people that often forgets that we're marketing to real people just like us.
It's funny, and I think it's interesting. As I talk to marketers, we just realize how cynical we can be too, because we know we feel it's a game, or we know it's a game, and I think really just getting out of our heads, and it sounds like what you're saying is we need to put ourselves in the shoes of our customer, and remember, we are too, and so it's easy to empathize with that. So I was just wondering, what do you wish marketers and sellers would do in this respect? What are some suggestions you have on how we could get better at this?
Yeah, well, I think the counterintuitive nature of it is, I think, this insight that when you help your customers, and I use this line in the article, when you help your customers, that's the best way to help your business. And so I think we often sort of defend our actions, our self-promotional actions, by saying, well, that's the game we're playing. Like you said, we're kind of skeptical, and we live in a noisy world, and, the loudest shouter kind of gets the most attention. And yet that's exactly the thing that I think the data that we now have in the digital marketing landscape is proving isn't working. And as people, we know it's not what we want. And so we have to resist, I think, that sort of notion and put our customers first. And so it starts by helping, not selling. But what that doesn't mean is that it doesn't mean we have to let go of the need to drive results. And that's why I really love the line that when you help your customers, it's the best way to help your business, as opposed to when you promote your business is the best way to promote, and sell more of your business services and products. So that's what I wish every marketer would get. And it's really why I ranted in the article about, the secret to success, the secret to being effective and efficient with the marketing that we do today starts with this understanding that we're real people. We're trying to market to real people. And the best way to do that is to actually be helpful, is to want to really help them, not just with the product and service with you sell, but to help them as people and help the society at large solve its problems. And I think it's a nobler cause, and it's a much more challenging thing to do inside, corporate cultures.
Well, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. And you've probably experienced this as you've talked to your clients and marketers out there. But my experience has been, when I talk to marketers and sellers, I find that they don't want to just feel like they're making an impact on the top line and bottom line. They actually want to feel like they're making a real impact, a real difference, that what they do materially matters, and they feel good about it. And I think what you're talking about can help us do just that.
Yeah, it's this is really the direction that I'm kind of going from a content and thought leadership perspective. Is this, we all understand, and we've seen, there's enough people out there talking about this, desire to work for companies that have a real purpose or even a, kind of a social mission. But even at the individual level, like you said, we all want to do work that matters. And so one of the insights that I found is that being effective in my job was never enough to make me happy. I was only ever happy when I was effective and making an impact with something that I believed in. And so it's the combination of both meaning and impact. And if you go to my Twitter account, I think you see I have a line in there that says, life is short, do work that matters. It's not just that we all make an impact. It's just about whether we make an impact in the right direction, for the right cause, for the right purpose. And that it can be a corporate purpose. It can be a financial purpose, but there has to be a customer at the end of that financial decision that's being made, where you're actually solving a problem. And so again, I think it just comes back to being empathetic allows us, as employees, as people, to really feel like we're making an impact in a way that really matters to somebody.
I love it. And I loved what you said when you said, we all make an impact. Whether it's for good or bad, we're making an impact right now. And so I'm really glad you're bringing up this point. I think earlier in our interview, you mentioned that you had a story to share, and I just wanted to see if you had any examples or tips of how applying empathy has made a difference or impact.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I have a positive story and a negative story. Maybe I'll start with which one should I start with? What do you think? Should we start with the bad news?
Well, let's rip the band. Let's start negative. I like to resume positively if you could.
And it's not negative. I think it's a lesson that it's a lesson that's become public, and I sort of got a glimpse of it in private. And so the company, and I'm actually a customer and a huge fan, and I have to say, as a caveat to this, a huge fan of Wells Fargo. In fact, I was on the phone with them this morning on a mortgage refinance I'm trying to work through, and still a happy, satisfied customer with them. I had an opportunity to present to their marketing team about 6 months ago, before the scandal broke so maybe it was 9 months ago, before, of them trying to sort of force accounts on people. And the conversation we were having was very much like this one. It was about how content marketing requires a focus on really solving customer problems. And there's one way to really know if you're doing that, and that's with engagement. You can measure engagement, in the form of, time on site, and in the form of social shares, and in the form of, whether people subscribe to your content. Those are all deep measures of not just are you reaching people, but are they voting? Are they giving you a vote of confidence in the content you're creating? And one of the marketers, senior marketer on the team, kind of stood up and was resistant to this idea. And this person said that, here at Wells Fargo, we are just buying reach and frequency, the kind of classic TV ad buying model. We are measured on reach and frequency. I said to the person that you have a choice in the world, the noisy world that we live in, because everybody can buy reach and frequency. Anybody can do that. But, the brands that set themselves apart are the ones that are really looking to engage the right people. And so, the example I said was you can shout into the wind, or you can speak one-on-one to the people that you can really help. And so that's the choice you have as a brand. And, I don't think that analogy went over very well. And, and it was really only a few weeks later that the story broke, and then I think we've all seen what's happened there. And, I'm optimistic that they've learned this lesson. And I think that they have such an amazing corporate history and a culture. And I think that there was just a few of the wrong people in leadership positions who were forcing a value in pushing the business over the needs of the customer. It's exactly, I think, the wrong way to approach this whole idea of help your customers and you help your business. It's the opposite. And so that's kind of my negative story. I don't know if you had any there were any good insights in there for your audience.
Just, and I've written about this. I think there's just when we focus on the wrong things, we can almost become sociopathic, trying to get our needs met at the expense of others. And in this case, clearly Wells Fargo customers didn't get the benefit as Wells Fargo was getting its needs met of revenue. And so I think they'll turn it around, as you talked about as well. But and they're working on addressing that. So let's switch to a positive example or one that a story that you could share.
Well, and I think the main lesson for Wells Fargo, and it's kind of like it's in their mission statement, like they really want to help customers. It just the problem was, and I talk about this when I do speeches on leadership, is that culture. People talk about we need to change the culture. Well, culture is really just a codification of what's valued by the organization.
Yeah.
Leadership is just a visual, it's just a personal expression of values. And so I think what Wells Fargo learned was that they had the values in place. They had named them. They had documented them. They just weren't actually putting value behind them. They weren't promoting people. They weren't making a good example of the people that were actually promoting the right values for their business. And so I'm going to go back to, my former company, SAP. I don't know who does the study, but there's a study done every year. I read an article in Harvard Business Review a couple of months ago, top 10 empathetic companies. And SAP is number 10 on the list. And I'm really proud to see them make that kind of recognition. Their CEO, guy named Bill McDermott, who was really, really instrumental in my career, and essentially almost personally mentored and created an opportunity for me to do what I was able to do at SAP. And he had a life-changing experience. He had an accident about maybe a year and a half ago. And he kind of came back transformed from that experience and decided that it wasn't just about making the numbers. This is a hard-charging sales guy, really super successful individual, one of the most charismatic leaders I've ever met. And he was really good at motivating SAP to hit the number. And, he came back, I think, really transformed as the first American CEO of this German company. And there's an article, I think, out on Forbes or Fast Company, I believe it is, about this journey that he's taken. And he's, making empathy a valued, rewarded, recognized value inside the organization. And they're starting to see, they've kind of turned the ship, and they've changed their culture, not because they tried to change their culture. They changed their culture because they focused on putting a value behind this, this sort of, very touchy-feely kind of, hippy-dippy sort of emotion called empathy. And so I think it's a great example. You can see it in their advertising. They don't talk about their latest product. They talk about how they help their customers run better. Their whole tagline is a customer focus. So even when they do advertising, it's at least customer focused messaging. And you see it, it was the reason I was able to implement the content marketing program I did, and the reason why I think they're, a leader in the technology marketing space for sure.
Well, and for our listeners, I'll put a link to this article that Michael mentioned, so you can check it out. And I agree. And I've also read stories about how Bill McDermott is using empathy to build more powerful teams. And I think what you brought up as the example is, it's hard for us to be empathetic outside unless we first have that transformation inside, and how we relate to our others, how we relate to our teams. And so, and it really, from what I've seen is that it does take leadership to do this, even self-leadership. So what advice do you have for those who want to sell the idea of empathy to leaders or to others inside their company?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's exactly the topic that it's specifically the topic that I'm looking to address in a lot of my outreach and content and keynote speeches this year. And it's essentially this notion of what I call champion leadership. And so, it's easy if you're Bill McDermott, you're the CEO, you can say, you can decree that empathy is now important. But what do you do if you're like most of us, you're down the pole, you're down the pole a little bit and you're looking up and maybe you don't feel that it's valued across your organization. And so I think the best way to do this is something I've learned in the course of my career is you need to be empathetic by putting that recognition on others inside your organization that are pushing these ideas. So what do I mean by that? If you see someone who's fighting to create a customer-focused piece of content versus a self-promotional ad, support that person. We all have great ideas, but ideas are worthless unless someone supports them. And if you're not getting support from the top, the concept I'd like to really encourage people to think about is we're all leaders, but do we champion other people's great ideas? And so it starts with, I think, just being, again, almost self-sacrificing to begin with, which can be, just as hard inside a hard-charging corporate culture as empathy can be. But I think just starting with that concept of who can you help inside your organization to promote the great customer-focused ideas, the empathetic ideas that they have.
That's really great advice. And it's also challenging, too, because I find in my own experience that it's easy in a split second to switch from thinking of others to thinking of myself. And so that's just a continual thing. And so, as you're talking about it, I think it really is setting that intention to value others, to value their ideas. And again, that the whole spirit of helping. Well, this has been a really great interview. I've come away with some great insights from you, Michael. Thank you so much. And what's the best way for our readers and listeners to get in touch with you and to get exposed to more of your thinking?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. It's marketinginsidergroup.com is my website, which I've kind of modeled after this whole empathetic approach. Instead of really pushing products and services, it's essentially more of a blog where I'm sharing content that I think is helpful, with a little bit of a, explanation of what we do, but marketinginsidergroup.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @BrennerMichael, or connect with me on LinkedIn and Facebook and happy to connect with your audience there as well.
Awesome. And again, for our listeners, I'll have links to all these resources. And Michael, thank you again. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think this is an important topic. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it.